Hey there, Dave Paulides, canammissing project, copyrighted edition for a video page. Thanks for being here. I'm very appreciative. Give us thumbs up if you like the video and encourage your friends to come by. You know, during the last week, every time I've gone out somewhere in northern Montana, one of you guys, one of the villagers, has stopped me. And we've had some great conversations. I appreciate it. And three out of the four people I met this week said, I can't believe you don't have more followers. Yeah. See, if you think about the density and the number of people up here in Montana, and there's not a big population that know about me and are watching me versus the rest of the US, I don't understand it either. But we're going to keep plugging away. This week I was doing some research on an old case. And this case happened in the late 1800s. And I was reading the articles and they were talking about how word just came in about an incident that happened 2 weeks earlier in Chicago. These people were in California. I started to think about the world we live in today. An incident can happen in one part of the world, and within minutes we'll know about it. There's like 8 different news services that I subscribe to on Twitter, and I follow it pretty close. And they put bulletins through, and I like to know what's going on around the world. And I spend a lot of my time trying to understand the certain facets of what are happening in these different parts. As an example, when I worked in Silicon Valley, after I left the police department, I was an HR director for a couple big Silicon Valley companies. One of the companies had fabs. Those are industrial sites that make computer chips. And we had a couple of fabs in Japan and a couple that we worked with in Taiwan. And the big company in the world that does semiconductor chips is called TSMC. And 80% of all the microchips in the world come out of Taiwan. If you've been following the news, you know that China has been flying missions into Taiwan airspace almost daily for the last week, just threatening them. And there have been overt statements by China saying that they believe they own Taiwan. If China takes over Taiwan, your life will never be the same. That's right. Why do I say that? In an average new vehicle that's being sold, Chevy, Ford, GMC, whatever, each car has a minimum of 200 computer chips. Yeah, can you believe that? That's why we have a shortage of new vehicles right now. If China takes over Taiwan, and now they've got probably 90 to 95% of the world's computer chip manufacturing, we're doomed. Yeah, laugh all you want. But if you think about it, washers, dryers, every appliance in your house, your cars, your tractors, everything that we use for transportation, trains, airplanes, they all have massive amounts of chips. We have become so dependent on China. We're doomed. We're doomed. And why is that? Because they will control what we pay for those chips. We won't control our own destiny. Remember, I made a video a little while ago about China and pharmaceutical drugs. I told you the vast, vast majority of all pharmaceutical drugs are made in China. 100% of all generic drugs are made in China. If China and the United States get in a conflict, what do you think is going to happen? They don't care about us, I'm sorry, but they really don't. They want to run the world. And the amount of people over 65 that are taking pharmaceutical drugs right now is huge. If they want to start killing or greatly inflict fear, anxiety, and pain in the US world, just shut down the flow of pharmaceuticals coming into the United States. Our pharmaceutical companies can't ramp up to manufacture those drugs for probably a year. And they'll be probably 5 times as much. Think about it. Now, I'm not trying to instill fear. Folks, I'm just giving you facts. Facts are, Taiwan falls. We're doomed. Not as a country, not as a people. Our economy is doomed. And we're headed that direction right now. Inflation is through the roof. China can continue to drive that inflation if they want to. That's right. Now, the Biden administration has not been too defensive of Taiwan in the last several months. I actually knew people that lived there when we used to communicate HR-wise between companies. And they're just like us. Really. The ones I met are just like us. Different race, different size. But you know what? We're all people from the same world. They want their freedom. Just like us. They want to be able to make a decision about themselves, about their body, about their lifestyle. They want to be able to make as much money as they want, not as much money as another country tells them. They don't want their cell phones tracked everywhere they go, like they are in China. It's a scary, scary scenario. And I know some of you just have your head buried all the way to your shoulders, don't want to hear this, don't want to believe it. I don't care. I'm going to keep laying the facts on you. And why are the facts important? Facts go towards your mental health. Yeah, that's right. Because if you don't slowly get acclimated to these issues and boom, they hit you in the face one day, many of you are going to drop like a stone because you won't be able to handle it. Slowly getting acclimated to what's happening in this world is going to help you. And anybody tells you China's our friend, you better start watching other channels for your news, because they are not. There's there are newspapers around the world that have people that have left China as part of them, as journalists now. And they tell what it's like there. They tell what is happening. Be very careful about what you believe about China. They have so much money that they can buy anyone they want to in the world, and they have many times. They can instill money into certain causes, and that money can almost put anybody they want in office anywhere in the world, and that is very scary. People have said, oh, you know, Russia is our big enemy. Give me 15 minutes in a public forum. I get 15 minutes and let the other person get 15 minutes, and we'll figure out who's really the enemy, Russia or China. Russia is nothing. Really is nothing compared to China, which is the reason that Russia's sitting on China's back right now. Yeah. So that's my little bit this week about semiconductor chips in Taiwan and China. Bet you didn't know that. So let's get to some letters. All of you know about my complications with the National Park Service over the years. And in the last 11 years, I've met several people that have been high up in government in different times and different locations. Two of those people told me that the most corrupt federal government agency is the National Park Service. I don't mean the people that you see at the parks, no. Higher up, higher echelon. They are so ingrained in the swamp. They're so ingrained in that government lifestyle. And I've read you before letters that they've sent me that are just atrociously rude, abusive, obnoxious. This is our park. This is our land. We'll control it. That's their attitude. Now, I'm going to bring you up on some things that you may not know, especially people that want to go to work for the National Park Service. This is an article from a few years ago. It says, National Park Service survey finds widespread harassment. Survey finds 1 in 10 employees report sexual harassment. Nearly 40% of the National Park Service employees experienced some form of harassment over a 12-month period, according to a long-awaited survey results released by the agency. The survey assessed sexual harassment, hostile work environment, and gender discrimination in the nation's parks, monuments, and recreation areas. About 19% of the respondents reported gender-based harassment, 10% said they encountered sexual harassment, and 0.95 or 1% said they experienced sexual assault. 1%. Some employees reported harassment based on their race, age, and disability as well, and 50% of the Park Service permanent employees responded to the survey. A second survey aimed at seasonal employees is still in the works. The next statement is how the National Park Service is failing women. So this report came out 2017-18 and then got buried and nobody saw it. And essentially nothing got done because the National Park Service knows how to market itself to you, to make itself this, oh, great place, great. No, the Park Service didn't do anything except maintain something nature gave us. That's right. It is not theirs, it's yours. And that's what you need to remember. They're doing nothing for you but maintaining that location and restricting your movement in that park, monument. That's right. There was a time, up until just several months ago, where the Park Service wouldn't even let us film in a park without a special permit that they arbitrarily and capriciously controlled. That's right. We got denied to film in Yosemite. At first they told us that they lost the permit request that I applied for. It was tracked, it was sent to their office, I had tracking, and people said, oh yeah, that went to our mailroom, but the mailroom never gave it to us. Oh, so I sent another one. Came back, oh no, we can't approve it at this and blah, blah. Folks, it's arbitrary, but it's our park. So, somebody just like me over on the East Coast said, hey, I'm going to do it anyhow. And they got arrested, and they went to court, and it finally went to the appellate court, and it got ruled that what the Park Service is doing is illegal by controlling the access to our First Amendment rights to report for you. So guess what they lost? They lost their rights to permit anybody going in there to film or photograph. That's the reason you see me occasionally in there filming like you did from Crater of the Moons. Very upset with the Park Service. The top echelon, not many good people up there. And if you're going to go to work for them or you have a relative that is, I would tell them to stay away. So, this is an article from National Parks Traveler magazine. The National Park Service this is December 18th, 2020. National Park Service and Interior officials have refused to discuss how extensive the spread of infection might be within their agencies. Interior has refused to respond to multiple Freedom of Information Act requests from the Coalition to Protect America's National Parks, seeking information on the rate of infection within the Park Service. Yeah. So the Park Service has figured out that, yeah, the Freedom of Information Act is a law that they have to comply with. But you guess what? If they refuse to comply, what's the ramifications? Nothing. Yeah, nothing. So they just won't do it if they don't want to do it. And then, according to the law, they have to respond within a specific time frame. They just don't do it. So you know what you have to do? companies like Judicial Watch have to sue them in federal court every time for failing to respond to our Freedom of Information Act request, and a judge has to order them to do it. That's how worthless our government is right now. The amount of attorney resources that's spent to win something in court against the National Park Service, and they're throwing government attorneys that are on the payroll anyhow. What a complete waste of resources. And they do it all the time. So this is off of a site called Peter Ventura Law. And this is the story. According to a New Hampshire union leader, a Massachusetts woman, 41-year-old Elizabeth Brown, was seriously injured on August 10, 2015 at 1:15 while climbing Mount Moriah in the White Mountains National Forest. She was near the summit when she ran into a tree limb which lacerated her head and caused profuse bleeding that needed immediate medical treatment. Ms. Brown was fortunate that two fellow hikers found her shortly thereafter. The kind strangers bandaged her head and called 911. However, they were more than 4 miles from the nearest road, so Ms. Brown had to hike along with her newfound companions all the way down the mountain to Route 16, one of the major thoroughfares to and from the White Mountains. It was slow going. They had only made it about 2 miles. At 5 p.m., they were met by Fish and Game officers and 2 hikers. The 4 continued to assist her until she was safely on her way to a hospital. Mr. Brown was an experienced, well-supplied hiker who was herself a member of the Appalachian Mountain Club. She and the others had the presence of mind and equipment necessary to tend to her injury. Given her experience and preparedness, one may wonder how she got into the accident in the first place. What if it turns out that the accident was not Mr. Brown or Miss Brown's fault, but the fault of those who managed the park? Could she sue? That's the question. In times past, people were not allowed to sue their king. This doctrine was called sovereign immunity. And even today, the doctrine of sovereign immunity protects governments from most kinds of lawsuits. It took a special act of Congress to sue the government for injuries the government caused, which created an exception to the sovereign immunity doctrine. Now, why I put that in here is because if our government isn't aware of a liability in their park, then they can't be liable for not addressing it. Ka-ching! Do you know where I'm going with this? Yeah. Missing people. They won't turn over a list of missing people to us. They say they don't keep a list of missing people. But if you watch our first movie, Missing 411, when we interview the former head of the the Department of the Interior, look at his face when Ben, my son, asked him that question. Yeah. Faces, expressions are worth $1 million sometimes. So if the National Park Service doesn't acknowledge that they have lists of missing people, that they understand where people are going missing, that they understand that there are these interlocking elements between the cases, then they don't ever have to admit that there's a problem because they didn't know. Even though I've written all the books, I've filed all the Freedom of Information Act requests, they could still admit in court, hey, we never knew. That's right, folks. That's their out. Pretty sick, isn't it? In short, I ran this by a couple people and everybody agreed. Our government will not acknowledge what they can't control. Think about what that can apply to. They won't even acknowledge what they can't control. All right, on to the first letter. Dear Dave, my name is Paul. I'm a 42-year-old and I've been a fan of your channel for about a year when I first discovered it. Now bear with me as I have trouble conveying my thoughts to paper. I've been struggling with mental health problems for my entire life. I've battled depression and addiction which have led me to some dark times. Last year, after a few month-long alcohol relapse, I checked myself into a rehab facility. Now to the story. I'd been there for about 2 weeks. of a 4-week stay. Let me stop there for a second. If any of you have really ever known an alcoholic, to beat the addiction is monumental. If you're a severe alcoholic, it can actually kill you if you don't do it medically prescribed. It's true. So I admire someone who's taking this step to get into rehab. If you have that problem, get to a counselor and get some assistance, and then get yourself in if you can. This is a huge first step. I was sitting in the lodge, which was 3 floors tall, and rooms looked over a common area inside the building. I was on the 3rd floor waiting for a counseling session. As I was sitting there, one of my fellow residents, a guy that always had a smile and positive thing to say every time I saw him, came up the stairs and into his room that I was sitting directly across from. I was doing some reading, so I wasn't paying a whole lot of attention to him, but I noticed that he had a ripped sheet off his bed and was doing something to it. Later, I would find out he was tying a noose. He came out of his room, and I looked up at him, and I could see in his eyes that something was different, like a blank stare. I was confused as to what he was doing. He had come out of his room, sheet in hand, and started tying it into the railing. I looked at him and said, "Hey, what's up? What are you doing, man?" He didn't say a thing and started to climb over the railing. That's when it hit me. I jumped up. He'd gotten himself over the railing. Then I grabbed a hold of him, wrapping my arm around his body. He then began to put the noose around his neck. We were fighting for his life. He wanted to end it. I wanted him not to. I was able to hold him there while keeping the noose off his neck, fighting as hard as I could until the other employees heard my yells and ran up the stairs to help. Thankfully, we were able to pull him back over the railing and stop him from ending it all. After this happened, I was in shock for a long time. I myself had thought about suicide many times. The things that bothered me the most was I saw him earlier that morning and he was his happy, positive self. Then within an hour, he was not himself. I guess my point is we never know what is happening in people's minds, and life is so fragile. The other thing that bothered me was I did get some counseling from my counselor after what happened, but the employees that helped pull him over were treated much differently and given much more support. My thoughts on this is that me and people with mental and addiction issues aren't looked at the same as normal people. We are treated as though we are a lower class. I know this is a big contributor for people with depression to keep it to themselves and not reach out. I don't speak on what happened. The few times I have tried, someone will say that I'm looking for a pat on the back or be a so-called hero. That is not the truth. It is important for us when dramatic things happen to be able to vent and talk about it openly. Thank you for what you do, Dave. We need this topic of mental health and suicide talked about now more than ever. That was a noble thing. That man you save owes you a lifetime of hugs. You know, in that moment where people are on the verge of taking their life, I can almost say for certainty that they are thinking of really nothing else. And that they're razor focused on just that and to get it over with and to end their pain. Been many times when I was a policeman where I was in conversations with people who had or were about to attempt suicide. A lot of people had already tried, and if we hadn't gotten there, they would have bled out. There were other times where people were on the verge and a neighbor called. Every time I've been around those people, it was a sad event to see somebody so depressed they were willing to do it. But I have a different picture of life these days. It's not so uncommon. So thank you for this man saving that guy's life. Next story. Just wanted to write to you to say keep on going, including the mental health topics. I know many have told you so. Ben had nothing to do with you. You loved him, he loved you. It was not a lack of love. I'm so sorry you lost him. However, his loss has helped prevent mine. Your video on Ben and your continued focused support on mental health has saved me more than once. I have suicidal thoughts multiple times a month, just as the man described in the October 3rd video. It somehow feels like an outside force or an internal one simultaneously. It's overwhelming. One of the things that always helps me through it is heading over to the Can-Am YouTube channel and putting on a video, any video since Ben, no matter how many times I've seen it. You love Ben and you don't know me, so saying that Ben saved my life or that his life was traded for mine or anything along those lines is not helpful. Not to you and not to me. Even using that sentence to set up my real point feels wrong to an extent. Because who I am, to be more important or valued than Ben. Why his for mine instead of mine for his? While all of this hurts to say, and it's not my intention to hurt you, I believe the answer is you, specifically your strength and heart of character. When we stop talking about Ben and me, and rather look at Ben from 30,000 feet, I know there are so many in my position with regards to your video's saving force. With that lens, it becomes fairly plain to see. I believe you and Ben intertwined forever, have done, are doing, and what most can only dream. Truly fulfill God's will. Your suffering is unimaginable. At the same time, God gives the unimaginable burdens to those strong enough to carry them. With how great pain you are suffering, I believe it is just a drop in the ocean compared to how much future suffering you have helped and will continue to help prevent. I pray that when your family finally comes to an end, you get the chance to see and feel the impact you've had on the world in as personal and quantifiable way as the impact Ben has had on your world. To give you the smallest of glimpses into my entire family tree and legacy would have already be ended with me if not for you. All my cousins are women. Now future generations of my family will have the chance of a life, and who knows what impact they will have on this world. What I do know is that you and Ben are directly responsible for the creation and existence of an entire family name, generations of life, laughter, family, and love. And that is the bare minimum of your impact on my family alone. I've already written far more than I intended. I hope I successfully conveyed my message. When it comes right down to it, all I'm trying to say is thank you. But it is not possible to put that amount of strength behind those words to express my true feelings to you, Ben, and y'all's impact. You alone have helped me more than all of my professional, psych, med, pharma help combined. I can feel your love through the screen and it's personal. But I can feel how much you love. If I can feel how much you love me as a stranger through a screen, Ben felt your love, and your love was and is strong enough to prevent everything except God's will. That's how I know Ben's suffering was the bare minimum required for God's will. He did save him in every way. And that matters to the eternal life of the human soul. One thing in there that was said is that we are given enough weight on our shoulders that we can withstand. I don't think that's always true. In Ben's case, I don't think it was true. I think that the people who actually take their life were overburdened. I'm still here. Even though the burden has crushed me to my soul, it hasn't taken me out yet. And it won't. But I don't think that saying is always true. So you read letters like I just read to you. And how can I, as really nobody in this world, stop talking about mental health? I can't. This man says that we as this village, I don't take credit, but we as this village saved his life. And I've had letters along the same way from other people saying the same thing. No, I can't stop talking about it. I think the crisis of mental health in our world right now is as high as it ever has been. And I will continue to talk, and I will continue to address the needs, and I'll keep pushing. And when I get in front of legislators, I'll keep pushing them. So I'm an advocate for you, trust me. Now, this week, in this story, it's going to center all around water. As weirdly as the stories are, it's going to, in one way or another, they're going to be about water in the end. And I've been sitting on 2 out of these 3 stories for a long time, so it was a good time to bring it up. So, the first story is out of Australia. It involves a sailboat called the Kaz II, K-A-Z. They left Airlie Beach in Queensland on April 15th, 2007. A 3-member crew. There's the boat. They had a combined 25 years of sailing experience. They left Airlie, A-I-R-L-A-E, en route to Perth on a 2-month trip. Captain was Derek Batten, 56, the skipper, and with him were Peter and John Tunstead, brothers. One was 63, one was 69. So they left on the 15th of April. On the 18th, a helicopter spotted the boat adrift 88 nautical miles northeast of Townsville. I'll show you where that is. So this is where they departed from. And the boat's found near the Barrier Reef up here off of George's Point. And that distance is over 150 miles from point to point. Well, eventually on April 20th, authorities boarded the 33-foot catamaran. Here's where it starts to get weird, if it isn't weird already. Nobody was on the boat. The radio, GPS was functioning. There was a newspaper laying open on the table. Nobody was on board. Engine was idling. Silverware on the table. Large amount of food in the cabin. Pile of clothing on a bench inside. Made a note that there was no lifeboat, but they weren't sure if there ever was one. They towed the boat to Townsville, Queensland for a forensic exam. And the police investigated and showed that the boat, per the GPS, was adrift since the day it left Airlie Beach. And they thought since about 10:15 a.m. The only thing wrong with the boat was the sail was badly torn. So there was an inquest. And the coroner named Michael Barnes took all the reports, gathered them up from the police, from the helicopter, from the GPS, and he came up with this theory. And the theory is that shortly after the boat left the dock, it set sail for George's Point and around the northern part of Australia. And a sailboat with that type of maneuvering capability could set its course and stay on that course based on GPS. So you didn't need to be there, you could go to sleep, etc. And the coroner thought that at some point around 10:15, 10:30 that morning, it's a wild theory, that fishing line got wrapped around the rudder or the propeller, and one of the brothers accidentally fell in. He didn't say why he accidentally fell in, but he said that was his theory. And then as the boat's continuing to sail, the second brother jumps in to help the first brother because neither one supposedly swam very well. Well, that left Derek Batten, the skipper, at the helm. And rather than just make a loop with the boat and come back and pick him up, the coroner said that he thought somehow that Derek was in the wrong position and the boom swung around and hit him and knocked him off the boat too. And then the boat just continued to sail on and left these men dead in the water, essentially. Sharks got them. They did find 3 life preservers in the boat. At the time when the authorities boarded the boat, they started to do a search going backwards from where they knew it sailed from. But that's a massive amount of water to check. Well, after the coroner came out with his theory, somebody on the mainland of Australia, a shortwave radio operator, said that he had talked to the men on that boat sometime between 6 and 7 p.m. the night that the boat left, or about 8 hours after the supposed accident described by the coroner. So that really threw a wrench into the theories. There were also theories that these guys were involved in drug running. I heard that. But the police said that there was no evidence of anything on the boat illicit, illegal, or bad. It's a real mystery, I will say. I've read a lot of them. That one is a good one. And the 3 men, where are they? I would hate to think that they were left in the middle of the ocean to die as their boat sailed away. You know, a lot of times when you're on these sailboats, you're actually tied into the boat, so you can't fall off like that. I know of another story when I was scuba diving a lot. I always wanted to go to the Great Barrier Reef to go diving. And there's a famous story about a diver who got separated from his partner while he was diving. Everyone boarded the boat, and you're supposed to, when you're on a dive boat, go down the list of names and check off everybody who's there. Well, they didn't. And they left, one man behind, in the middle of the ocean, alone. And they came back the next day. Nobody was there. And they didn't find anything. Nobody ever knows what happened to him. Theory, of course, was that it's probably eaten by sharks. There was a movie made about a husband and wife that were left under those same circumstances. It was a pretty good movie. But that's a very scary way for anyone to die, because the water out there at a certain time of the year in Australia is pretty warm. You could survive a long time. But if you're 20, 30 miles offshore, you can forget trying to get to the beach. So that was the story of the Kaz II. And it was a 33-foot catamaran, perfect condition, everything was operable. Just the men never were found. So, go back a little bit further in time. Let's talk about the 1900s. And the area we're going to talk about is the Flannan Isles. Show you where that is. So, the UK, Isle of Man, Liverpool, Flannan Islands, way up north, the northwest coast, way out there north of Scotland. And the island is called the Eileen Moor, and they had a lighthouse on there. It was 23 meters tall. Different books say it was between 150 feet and 230 feet above sea level, but it was 160 steps from the ocean to the top. There were 3 lighthouse tenders in the lighthouse in 1900. And on December 15th, 1900, a steamer named the Arch Tour came by and noticed that the light wasn't on. So what they did was they sent a telegram to authorities, and on the 20th, UK officials were going to go out and fix it or determine what happened, and it was delayed because of storms. They couldn't go out. Well, on December 26th, the Hesperus, a boat supply ship from the UK, arrived. And there's 3 lighthouse tenders at the lighthouse at any one time, and they rotate on the shore. Well, that 4th keeper, a man named Joseph Moore, went up to the lighthouse. Doors were closed. 2 clocks inside had stopped. The beds were not made. The men wore oilskin coats because it rained and it was so wet out there. And there was 1 oilskin coat missing, and all 3 of the lighthouse keepers were gone. James Ducat was the head, Thomas Marshall and Donald MacArthur were the assistants. So when the Hesperus landed and they sent the tender up to check, they decided, well, we better send more men on, and they did, and the entire area was searched 4 times. They didn't find anybody. Oh, that's pretty weird. See, there was a rule amongst the lighthouse tenders back then that of the 3, only 2 were allowed outside the lighthouse at any one time, and the 3rd had to stay inside. So they were baffled. How could all 3 disappear? Well, I'll show you a picture here. This is a good one. Here's James Ducat. He was the chief, the head of the lighthouse tenders at this lighthouse. Donald MacArthur and Tom Marshall. So these are the men. Now on December 29th, the lighthouse superintendent for the entire region named Robert Muirhead arrived. And he started to walk the island. And he gave a quote to the newspapers that damage to the west landing area was difficult to believe if not seen. And he described 1-ton rocks that had been moved. His investigation showed that the clothing indicated that Ducat and Marshall had left, and 1 keeper was always to stay inside. So that meant the 3rd one had to have left the building against the rules. During this time of the year, it's freezing cold outside. No bodies were ever found, and no bodies ever washed up on shore. But the theory at the time was, here's a picture of the lighthouse, and this is the area where a little tender can come up and land, and then you have to walk your way up to the lighthouse. But the theory was that some huge, enormous, unbelievable storm had to have hit this island, and nobody knew about it until the superintendent arrived. There were also notations based on several other things, weird things that happened in and around this island. Now, one thing I learned from doing heavy-duty research on the story is that 95% of what you read online about this story is false. 95%. People have taken this story and twisted it beyond belief to fit a criteria in their ghost and mystery shows. Suffice it to say, it's really weird that 3 trained men disappeared from an island. Because in their lighthouse, they were safe. So even under the most brutal storms imaginable, there'd be no reason to go outside. You're safe. Just wait for the storm to pass. It's going to take 3, 4, 5 days, whatever. Just let it go. So the idea that 2 went out and didn't come back, say, and then the 3rd went out looking, that would have went against all rules that they signed up and agreed to. So, one way or another, weather had to have played a role in this. The idea that none of them were found in this isolated, remote area out in the middle of the ocean. Strange. So, again, that's Flannan Island and the Eileen Moore, M-O-R lighthouse. It'll do you well to read different stories. Again, I'm telling you, 95% of them are all wrong. And there's some stories that said that, they found the Lightkeeper's journal. I couldn't find one thing to validate that. Some other people said that they had seen ghosts and UFOs at the lighthouse. Couldn't find anything to validate that. And I searched some really old articles and some lengthy ones in newspapers. Couldn't find anything like that. Suffice it to say, it's an unusual story on its face because it's never happened since. All right. The last story. I got to say, this one's unusual. I had 3 or 4 people send this to me, but I'd already heard about it. One person said that their relative worked for the Royal Navy and they knew that this was an odd story. Yeah, I'll agree to that. There's a boat called the Nicola Faith, F-A-I-T-H. It was a fishing boat. That's the boat. And it was fishing in Colwyn Bay. Left January 27th of this year, and it was supposed to return about midnight. And people last heard from the boat about 9 p.m. and was heading for Rice Flat near the offshore windmills. When it didn't return by midnight, the family called the Coast Guard, had 3 members on board, and they knew their last position based on GPS coordinates. So that was on January 27th. The next day, the UK authorities start searching. And here's the scenario. This is important, and this is why I say maps are important. Right after they disappeared, the family started their own search. The search for them by the government lasted 2 days, and they flew aircraft and helicopters all through this area. Now, their last known location was right here, right off 2 miles, 1.8 miles off Colwyn Bay, and they were heading towards this location on the Rice Flat. Okay, now let yourself get acclimated to this because this is important. Helicopters, fixed wing, everything searched. Well, a life raft was found way up here, their life raft way up here, way north, 90 miles north from where they all disappeared. Because their bodies started showing up 2 months later down in this area. Now, the family knew exactly where they were located and started searching this area with side scan sonar, and they weren't finding anything. Now, the boat was 30 feet long, very reliable. On March 12th, 43 days after they disappeared, Russ Ballantine was found. He was 39 years old. Ballantine was found in this area, right off a beach here. Now, 44 days after the boat disappears, Carl McRath, 34 years old, is found up here, his body. They're all on the beach. And then, 45 days later, Alan Minard, 20 years old, is found over here. So, what happened? Well, good question. Again, they were last heard from on the 27th, heading towards Rice Flat. On April 13th, the government had started their own search for the boat, and they found it. And get this, folks. They had the GPS coordinates from the family. The family search crews searched that whole area. The government goes out with their boat, and 177 meters, it's about 200 yards, 177 meters from the GPS coordinates, they find the boat underwater. Well, that's pretty weird, isn't it? Yeah, I'd say so. How come the original search didn't find it? Yeah, that's a good question. So the government of the UK sets out a big trawler to pick up the boat, and that's what they pick up. And they take it out of the ocean. So on April 6th, they had started an inquest into the men. And here's the guys that they found deceased. They found the raft and the bodies on opposite ends of the giant bay. How did the aircraft miss the raft on the water? At the inquest, the government hasn't released the cause of death of the men. The government hasn't released the cause of the boat sinking. What's going on? Pictures of the boat showed it almost completely intact on its side at the bottom of the ocean. There was no statements about what might have happened, what could have happened. There was no mention of heavy seas that day. There was no mention of a distress signal at 9 o'clock that night. There was nothing. Now, if they did launch a life raft, that means they had some time. And the question comes out, did anybody get in the life raft? And if they got in the life raft, how did they ever get out? Now, they were only 1.8 miles offshore. They could easily see the shoreline from where they were. You think they could have made it. Except that the water in that area is like California water. It's really cold. So, all three men were deceased on the shore, no cause of death. I would agree that this is a real mystery at this point. The government could really put it to rest if they just start talking about it, but they're not. And they have a government agency in the UK that handles ship catastrophes, shipwrecks, sinkings, etc. And it's admirable that they were able to find it as quick as they were, considering the family couldn't find it, even though they knew the GPS coordinates. It's hard to believe. So, those are three mystery stories that I just gave you. Again, Flannan Isles, the lighthouse keepers, the Kaz II, the boat off the coast, and the Nicola Faith. 3 incidents, 9 men. Weird stories. So, if you like the channel, please give me a thumbs up. I'm getting hammered later by, there's a group out there that I can tell by the beginning, every time a video loads, let's say it's an hour-long video, within the first 20 minutes, I always get a ton of people giving me thumbs down. Well, I know they couldn't have watched it all because it just went up. So it's just people that are haters. And frustrating. Really frustrating. But I know that the vast, vast majority of you are great people, and I appreciate that. And we have to stay together and appreciate what we have here. And I know that we're in for rougher times come the future. It's a guarantee. And if you're not doing anything right now, I'm serious about this. If you're not working, go out and get a job. If you can work, go out and get a job. Help our world. Right now, we need truck drivers. Go drive a truck first. Help the world. We need them bad. I know some people think, oh, I'm too good for this or I'm too good for that. You know, I always knew I wasn't too good for anything. It's my younger time in life, I was doing the most menial jobs available. And if I had to feed my family or I had to do something for this world, I'd do it. I don't care. I had some friends of mine the other day saying, hey Dave, what if What if they said that they want all the ex-policemen lining up on the border, helping out National Guard to keep people out of our country who are trying to get in illegally? I said, I'd go. I'd go tomorrow. Honest to God. And if that request came in from, say, the Texas Department of Safety or Texas National Guard and said, hey, all former policemen, we need you down here. It's a call for saving our country. Hell yeah, I'd do it. I don't have a problem with that at all. In fact, I know probably 20 other guys that I communicate with that would go in a minute if the call came in. So it's not about doing sometimes what you want to do. It's doing what our world needs. And I think right now we need truck drivers. Bad. And I think what's going to happen is the National Guard's going to get placed in there and they're just going to start driving trucks for private companies because we're in a bad need. I mean, everything that you can think about is sitting offshore in hundreds of ships at Long Beach and New York and Seattle. They can't get in because they don't have enough truck drivers to drive the trucks away that have some storage on them. It's sad. But anyhow, thanks a million. I'll be back soon. Love your family. Do something compassionate and friendly for someone today. It'll make yourself feel better. And if you're feeling down or depressed, get on NAMI, N-A-M-I's website and find a group and join it. Hope to see you soon. Thanks a million.